Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Ahmed Mohammed, and today I'll be presenting my part of week seven's assignment. So, for the purpose of this assignment, Jessica and I have opted to go with: should all high school students be required to perform a certain amount of volunteer hours in order to graduate? Jessica will be speaking for the topic, while I will be doing the opposite. So, as an introduction, putting in volunteer hours in order to graduate does benefit the community and encourages responsibility. Yes, it teaches students responsibility. I don't disagree with that. But what I'm saying is that mandated volunteer service takes away from the meaning of the experience. Such an obligation imposed upon high school students today is not only unfair but unnecessary. The initiative to serve the community shouldn't have to come from feeling of sorry shouldn't have to come from fear of failing to graduate, but from what a student's passions and but from a student's passions and interests. Now, the obvious merit of volunteer service is not debatable. Students learn to appreciate lending a hand while nonprofits put those hands to good use. But the logic of forcing people to volunteer falls short when compared to the benefits students gain from the act of offering to perform volunteer service. Schools should do all they can to encourage students to volunteer by continuing to provide opportunities in the community and rewarding students who complete sorry about that, an exemplary number of hours. I always have an issue with that word. But volunteer service should not be required in order to achieve a high school diploma. Now let's look at some of the points that would support this. First, students have more to think about. I believe that students should not have to complete so many hours of community service to graduate. Many have things that they have to do after school, including work, homework, and even sports for their school. It can be a struggle for a student to do all that and community service. School is a place of learning, not for giving back to the community. If students want to give back, they can do it on their own time, but they should not be forced to do something that might be unrealistic for some to achieve in terms of time management in order to graduate high school and go on to greater things in life. Point number two, it should be a choice. It should be a choice of whether or not a student wants to volunteer in their community. Being forced to volunteer wouldn't make that student want to do it any more than they did before. The only reason they would do the community service is because it's required of them in order to graduate. I do not think it would be smart to require community service. Students would feel as though they're trapped and have no sense of freedom. Coming on to the third point. Forced volunteer service is more of a detriment than a help. Volunteer service should not be required in schools for three reasons. Volunteer service is all about giving back. If you're only doing it to get something out of it, you're missing the point. Point number two, students have so much expected of them already. With sports, clubs, academics, high school students have a lot on their plates. Requiring them to serve would just take away from their achievements in other areas. Third point, for lower income students, it doesn't make sense. Why should a student do volunteer work when his or her family is struggling? A paid job would feed her siblings. Volunteer work would not. Moving on, not enough time. Teens should not be forced to do this volunteer work simply because a lot of them don't have the time to fit, simply because a lot of them don't have the time to fit it into their daily lives. High schoolers would need to set aside several hours just for this work, as it requires so much time. That is why I think volunteer work should not be required. because it can be something, moving on to the next point, because it can be something like slavery. Now, before you go and get yourself in a twist, let me spell this out for you. If high school education is required and volunteer service is required of the child, then it results in involuntary labor, which is banned by the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. Therefore, I do not believe that volunteer service should be required as it uses slavery, which is defined as the use of involuntary labor. Moving on to the next point. The last point uh, here. It's for the wrong reasons. Mandatory volunteer service will cause students to do a half-hearted, worthless service simply to get the necessary hours rather to actually help the community. Volunteer service becomes nothing more than an inconvenience for students. It makes students akin to penitentiary, to prison inmates who work because they are forced to, not because they want to. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the merit of volunteer work stems from the fact that it is voluntary. If schools mandate that students perform volunteer service, then projects lose value to the students, to the student participants. Many students don't feel inspired by their time volunteering or serving the community as they were forced to do so by the school system. Encouraging good work for a good cause is one thing. Driving students to the good work for the sake of graduating is another. I think kids should be strongly encouraged to perform volunteer service, but at the end of the day, it should not be a mandatory criterion with which to graduate. With that being said, I thank you all for your time. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I hope you guys are well. Take care.